What happens when the new black girl at school becomes the target of the most powerful bully? Can she survive the humiliation, or will she fight back? Riley's life at Maple Ridge High took a sudden turn when Kyle Davis decided she was his next victim. But what happens when the bully meets someone who refuses to stay silent? Will Riley stand tall, or will she fall under the pressure? Like, subscribe, and don't miss the unexpected twist. This is just the beginning. Riley Johnson adjusted her backpack as she stepped out of the car, her sneakers crunching on the gravel of the Maple Ridge High School parking lot. At 16, she had been through enough school transitions to know what it felt like to be the new kid, but nothing quite prepared her for this. Maple Ridge, Oregon, a small, quiet town surrounded by forests and hills, wasn't quite like any place she'd lived before. Most of her life had been spent moving from one city to another because of her father's work, but this town felt different. It was remote, a place where everyone knew each other's business and secrets. And Riley, well, she was just another face in the crowd, unfamiliar and out of place. As she walked toward the entrance of the school, Riley couldn't shake the feeling that all eyes were on her, but not in a welcoming way. She had hoped that maybe this time she would just blend in. She wasn't interested in making waves or getting involved in the high school drama that seemed to follow her wherever she went. But that hope faded quickly. The moment she entered the hallway, she felt the tension in the air, a cold, almost palpable distance between her and the students around her. Riley had always been good at reading people, a skill she'd honed over the years of constant moving. She could tell when people were just curious, when they were trying to make a connection, and when they wanted nothing to do with her. At Maple Ridge, it was the latter. She could sense it in the glances, the whispers, and the way some students deliberately avoided eye contact. She had seen this before in every new school she'd been to, but this time it felt more intense. This wasn't just a lack of warmth. It was like she wasn't even supposed to be there. The walls of the school, covered in sports banners and trophies, felt more like a fortress than a welcoming space. The students moved in tight groups, laughing among themselves and talking about things she had no part in. Riley could feel the cliques forming around her, those who had known each other for years and weren't about to make room for someone like her. She hoped to keep her head down, to slip into the shadows unnoticed, but she knew deep down that wasn't going to happen. Here, anyone could become a target. The first few days at Maple Ridge High were quiet for Riley. She kept to herself, focused on classes, and did her best to avoid attention. However, it wasn't long before she felt the weight of being the new girl. She had hoped to simply blend in, but it quickly became clear that was not going to be possible. Kyle Davis, a name Riley had heard whispered throughout the halls, quickly took notice of her. He was a tall, athletic junior with a cocky attitude and a reputation for bullying anyone he deemed different. He thrived on making people feel small, and for reasons Riley couldn't understand, she had become his next target. At first, it was subtle. A passing remark here, a snicker there. Riley did her best to ignore it. She had been through enough school transitions to know that some kids just couldn't resist making someone feel like an outsider. But Kyle didn't stop with the passing comments. The first real jab came during a history class. Riley was sitting quietly at her desk, taking notes when Kyle leaned over the back of her chair, just loud enough for her to hear. "What are you trying to do, stand out with that outfit?" he said with a mocking tone. "Guess it's a vintage look, huh?" Riley forced herself to look down at her notebook, biting her lip to keep her mouth shut. She refused to let him see how much it bothered her. She couldn't let him get the satisfaction of knowing he was getting under her skin. But it didn't stop there. Every day, it seemed like Kyle found something new to target: her clothes, her shoes, her hair, even the way she walked. He'd make loud comments in the hallways, laughing with his friends as they watched her try to avoid eye contact. Riley tried her best to remain stoic, but she could feel their eyes on her, burning into her every time she passed. Then, in English class, the teasing escalated. As the teacher discussed the novel they were reading, Kyle leaned over again, this time with his friends Liam and Chase in tow. They whispered loudly enough for Riley to hear. "Did you hear that, guys? She sounds like a robot when she reads aloud. So weird." Riley tightened her grip on her pencil, hoping the feeling of the cool metal would ground her. She didn't want to react, didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. But Kyle wasn't done. He continued making fun of her loudly in front of the class. Every time she answered a question or even just turned the page in her book, he'd find something new to mock. The more Riley tried to ignore it, the worse it got. She could feel the weight of their stares, the laughter behind her, and the sense that she was becoming the target of the entire class's amusement. She had hoped that by staying silent it would eventually stop. But she was wrong. Kyle Davis wasn't going to let up. He wasn't done with her yet. The days seemed to blur together for Riley. The teasing had become a routine, an unwelcome but predictable part of each day. Kyle had escalated his taunts, getting bolder as the days passed, and it seemed like the whole school had become a spectator to his relentless pursuit of making Riley's life miserable. She had hoped with all her heart that it would end soon, but each day felt like a new round of humiliation. It was during lunch when things took a sharp turn. Riley sat alone in the cafeteria, as she usually did. She'd found a quiet corner by the windows, far enough from the chaos of the cliques that filled the rest of the room. The cafeteria was bustling with chatter, the clatter of trays and the noise of laughter. Riley sat with her earbuds in, pretending to read a book while trying to drown out the constant whispers and laughter surrounding her. She had learned to focus on the small things, the rustle of the pages, the weight of the pen in her hand, to keep her mind from wandering to the cruel words she knew would come. She didn't notice Kyle and his friends approach at first. The only indication that they had zeroed in on her was the sudden silence around her. She looked up just in time to see Kyle's smug grin, followed by the sneers of his friends, Liam and Chase. The other students had already started to notice them, and Riley's heart sank as she felt the eyes of the entire cafeteria turn toward her. "You always sit alone, don't you?" Kyle's voice rang out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Guess no one really wants to sit with the freak." Riley stayed quiet, her face flushed with the all-too-familiar sting of humiliation. She tightened her grip on her tray, hoping that by ignoring him, this would somehow go away. But it didn't. "You know, you're just asking for attention with that outfit," Kyle continued, sneering at her. "It's like you're trying to look weird on purpose." Riley bit her lip, keeping her gaze fixed on her food. She refused to look up, refused to show him that his words had any effect. She knew what he wanted. He wanted her to react, to give him the satisfaction of seeing her squirm. But Riley wasn't going to let him see that. Then, without warning, Kyle grabbed her tray, lifting it high into the air and with a sharp motion flipped it over. The plastic tray crashed onto the floor with a loud thud, sending mashed potatoes, gravy, and milk splattering across the floor and onto Riley's sneakers. The cafeteria fell into a stunned silence, the once lively chatter dying instantly as everyone watched what was happening. Riley froze, her heart racing as she stared at the mess before her. The food spread across the floor in a disgusting, sticky pool, and her shoes were already drenched in it. She could feel the eyes of every student in the room, all waiting for her to react. Would she cry? Would she scream at Kyle? Or would she break down and become the very thing he wanted to see? Kyle and his friends stood there laughing, their voices loud and mocking. "Oops," Kyle said, his grin wide and cruel. "Guess I got a little carried away." The laughter of his friends echoed through the cafeteria, and Riley felt her face burn with the heat of humiliation. Her chest tightened, but she kept her cool. She wasn't going to give him what he wanted. She wasn't going to cry. Instead, Riley stood up slowly, pushing her chair back in one fluid motion. She wiped her hands on her pants, still refusing to acknowledge the cruelty of the situation. The air felt thick with tension, the stares of her classmates pressing down on her, waiting for her next move. With a deep breath, Riley began to clean up the mess. She grabbed napkins from the dispenser, kneeling down to wipe the spilled milk and mashed potatoes from the floor. She didn't speak, didn't look up, just focused on getting the cafeteria back to some sense of normalcy. Her hands trembled, but she kept going, methodical in her actions. It wasn't about the mess. It was about refusing to let Kyle win. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but her face remained calm. She wasn't going to let him see her break. She wasn't going to give him the power to control how she felt. After several long moments of cleaning, Riley stood up, her movements deliberate and steady. She didn't look at Kyle or his friends, didn't acknowledge the silence around her. Without a word, she grabbed her tray from the ground and walked out of the cafeteria. The door clicked shut behind her, and she felt the weight of the eyes on her fade, leaving only the buzz of her own thoughts. She didn't feel victorious, but she didn't feel defeated either. As she walked through the hallway, she realized something important. Kyle had tried to control her, to manipulate her emotions, to make her feel worthless, but Riley refused to let him. She had chosen not to react, and in doing so, she had taken control of the situation. She wasn't going to let him dictate how she felt anymore. This wasn't the end of the bullying. She knew that. But for the first time since coming to Maple Ridge, Riley felt like she could stand tall, even in the face of his cruelty. The next day, Riley's hands were still trembling as she walked through the front door. She had tried to shake off the embarrassment from the cafeteria, but it clung to her like a heavy weight. Her sneakers were still stained with spilled food, and the humiliation was still fresh. Her father, Jason Johnson, was sitting in the living room scanning the newspaper, but when he saw her, he immediately noticed something was off. "Hey, kiddo, how was school?" Jason asked, his voice warm but commanding as he looked up from his newspaper. He had a way of making people feel seen, even when he wasn't trying. Riley hesitated. She had planned to keep it to herself, to just push through the pain. But looking at her father, she realized she couldn't hide it from him. She sat down beside him and let out a long sigh. "Dad, something happened at lunch today. Kyle Davis, he dumped my lunch on me in front of everyone. The whole cafeteria was watching." Jason set the newspaper down, his expression hardening. He wasn't one to let things slide, especially when it involved his daughter. "What did you do?" Riley shrugged, feeling small. "I didn't know what to do. I said it was an accident. I didn't want to make it worse." Her father stood up, his face a mixture of disappointment and determination. "Riley, you don't need to handle things like this on your own. You're not alone in this." He turned toward the door, already reaching for his coat. "I'm going to the school tomorrow." Riley's heart skipped a beat. "Dad, no, you don't have to," but Jason cut her off. "I do. No one should treat you like that, and no one is going to get away with it." The next day, Riley watched as her father, dressed in his sharp suit, walked confidently toward the doors of Maple Ridge High. He wasn't just any parent. He was Jason Johnson, the CEO of one of the largest companies in the town. When they arrived at the school, Riley could sense the shift in the air. Her father's presence commanded attention. Jason didn't waste time. He asked for an immediate meeting with Principal Warren and Kyle's parents. Soon, Riley found herself sitting in a conference room, surrounded by the school's administration and the Davis family. "You know who I am," Jason said, his voice steady but carrying an undeniable authority. "And I'm here because this needs to be addressed. What happened to my daughter today is unacceptable." Kyle's face turned pale when he realized who Riley's father was. The confidence that usually radiated from him was gone, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Darren Davis, Kyle's father, tried to laugh it off. "Jason, come on, it's just some harmless teasing. Boys will be boys, right?" But Jason didn't smile. "No, this isn't harmless and I won't let it slide. You're going to hold your son accountable for what he did." Riley felt the weight of the moment. For the first time since the bullying started, she wasn't fighting alone. Her father's calm but firm demeanor had shifted the power balance. Kyle wasn't in control anymore. Jason's eyes locked with the principal. "I expect a full report. If this school continues to allow things like this to happen, I will make sure everyone knows about it." The tension in the room was palpable. Riley looked at her father, realizing that things were about to change for both her and Kyle. The following morning, Riley's heart raced as she prepared for the assembly. Her father's bold intervention the day before had set everything in motion. Now, the entire school would witness what had never happened before. Kyle Davis would apologize to her publicly. Riley wasn't sure what to expect. Would Kyle offer a sincere apology, or would it be another empty gesture to save face? The gym was filled with students buzzing with curiosity. Whispers rippled through the crowd as they waited for the assembly to begin. Riley walked in, keeping her head high. For the first time since arriving at Maple Ridge, she didn't feel the weight of being judged by everyone. There was no longer a sense of isolation. She could feel their eyes on her, but this time it wasn't the usual mocking stare. It was different, respect perhaps, or maybe just curiosity. Principal Warren stood at the front, his voice booming through the microphone. "We've gathered here today to address the recent events in the cafeteria. We aim to ensure that everyone here feels safe and respected." Riley's gaze shifted to Kyle, who was standing at the front, his usual cocky attitude replaced by an uneasy shift in his stance. His friends, who had once laughed with him, now looked uncomfortable, unsure of what to do or say. Darren and Lauren Davis stood stiffly beside their son, trying to maintain composure, but even they knew this was bigger than them. "Riley," Principal Warren continued, "I'd like to call on Kyle to offer his apology to you." The gym went completely silent. Kyle stood there for a moment, staring down at the floor before reluctantly meeting Riley's eyes. For the first time, there was no arrogance in his expression. Just a hint of guilt, something she hadn't seen from him before. "I'm sorry, Riley," Kyle mumbled, his voice thick with discomfort. "I shouldn't have treated you like that. It wasn't right." Riley didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The apology, though reluctant, was all she needed to hear. It wasn't the words that mattered. It was the fact that Kyle was forced to apologize, that, for once, he was the one standing in front of the crowd, stripped of his power. As the apology ended, the murmur of the crowd began to rise. Riley turned and walked back to her seat, her head held high. For the first time, she didn't feel small. She had stood her ground, and now Kyle's influence was nothing more than a distant memory. The rest of the day passed by in a blur, but something had changed. When Riley walked through the halls, she noticed the shift. No one whispered behind her back anymore. Instead, there were quiet nods, small smiles of respect. People saw her differently. She had stood up for herself, and in doing so, she had changed how everyone viewed her. Riley finally understood the true meaning of standing up for herself. It wasn't about getting back at Kyle. It was about knowing her worth. No one could take that from her now. Kyle had lost his power, and Riley had found hers. As Riley walked through the halls of Maple Ridge High, she realized something important. Standing up for herself wasn't about fighting back with words or actions. It wasn't about proving someone wrong or making them feel the same hurt they had caused her. It was about something deeper. It was about recognizing her own worth and not letting anyone undermine it. Before this, Riley had always tried to hide her feelings, hoping the bullying would stop if she remained silent. She thought ignoring it would make it go away. But the truth was, by staying silent and letting others walk over her, she was giving them the power to control her. The apology from Kyle, though reluctant, wasn't what truly mattered. What mattered was the choice Riley made. She chose not to react to his cruelty. She chose to rise above it, and in doing so, she took back the power he had once held over her. Kyle had tried to break her to make her feel small, but Riley learned that the only way a bully has power is when we let them control us. Through this experience, Riley understood that standing up for herself didn't mean fighting back with anger. It meant refusing to let someone else define her. It meant saying, "I know who I am, and I won't let you take that from me." The key takeaway from Riley's journey was clear: self-respect and courage come from within. It's about knowing your own worth and not allowing anyone to make you feel inferior. When we stand tall in the face of adversity, when we refuse to be intimidated, bullies lose their power. Riley had proven that to herself, and to everyone else who had once thought she was just an easy target. In the end, Riley didn't need to win a battle. She needed to win her own respect and stand firm in her belief that she was worthy of it. And now, no one could take that from her.